Welcome to another episode of the Dan Norton Show. Today I am here with Bryan. Bryan came across me by hearing me on the David Pakman show recently, and he also heard me on the Majority Report with Sam Seder. And he contacted me and said he was intrigued and wanted to hear more about my worldview. So here we are to talk about that. Bryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Hello.
All right, so I think I will just turn this over to you, and you can ask any questions you wanted to about my worldview, and I'll let you steer the conversation.
Okay, sure. I'm let's call it like vaguely familiar with objectivism and Ayn Rand. For people such as yourself, discuss her and the philosophy here and there. I think I watched some iteration of Atlas Shrugged. Um, Never read any of her material, unless it was like kind of summarizations of material, but never actually read the material itself. And as I kind of understand, uh, how would you call this? What's that phrase? Like rational self-interest, right? Um, I think I kind of liken it to like just a small little analogy, and maybe this would be like a platform to kick off from. Is if when we board a plane and we're told all the little safety features of do this in the event of that kind of a thing, and they're talking about the oxygen masks coming down, they might refer to you having like a baby by your side, and your instinct might be to put the oxygen mask on the baby first because it's your baby and you care about them, and then you'll take care of yourself right after. But the rational thing to do would actually be to take care of yourself, so that in the event that if you were indeed trying to take care of the baby yourself and then you passed out, well, then no one's served by that kind of a thing. If you took care of yourself first, then you have the ability to kind of serve others afterwards. That's kind of how my interpretation, I guess, of what rational self-interest and objectivism kind of boils down to. And maybe we kind of take it from there if that analogy kind of makes sense and if I got that right.
Okay, we can start by talking about that. So so it is a central principle of objectivist ethics that you should pursue your own self-interests and not live for the sake of others. Now, how exactly that uh, manifests itself is not always obvious, and I think people often have misconceptions of what that means in practice. And Ayn Rand's view is often strawmanned as being the view that you should never care about anyone else. I mean, if anyone who reads Ayn Rand herself with an honest mind is not going to come away with the impression that she thinks you should be a rude jerk to others and not care about others at all, and run roughshod over people. Other people are extremely important. They're a self-interested value. I mean, other people are a great source of value to you. So it behooves you. It's in your own interest to treat others well, and that you will be treated well in turn, at least more likely than if you're a jerk to others. Then, I'm not going to want to be your friend if you're a jerk to me. Um, to say nothing of something worse than a jerk, like violating my rights by robbing, raping, murdering, that sort of thing. So, as for the particular example of the air mask, so the instruction is to put your own air mask on, or oxygen mask, before helping others. Now, what is the reason for that? I don't know that they give a reason when they're reciting their instruction. They just tell you what to do. But the the point, I mean, maybe it's that if you don't have your own air mask or oxygen mask on, then you're not in a position to help others, even though you might want to help others because they matter to you, like if you have a child. But the point of helping others, whether it's your child or anyone else, shouldn't be an end in itself. It's because it somehow serves your own interest. Like if you have a child, that child matters to you. So it's an egoistic thing for you to do to care about the child, because without that child, you are worse off. That child means a lot to you. You shouldn't have children in the first place. If you think it's not going to be in your own interest, you should only have them if you think it benefits your own life. So we could dig into this example more, but that's one thing I would say from the perspective of objectivism. If it's true that you should put your own mask on before helping anyone else, it's not because ultimately you'll be better able to help the other person. It's because ultimately it serves your own interest. Ultimately, everything you should do grounds out and it serves your own interest. So, as I said, we can get into that more if you want, but I'll just pause there and throw it back to you.
Yeah, I guess that kind of answers my question. That I think that analogy is good. It's the reason why I drew it as it's your child, because just taking objectivism at face value, of course, you're going to put your mask on first, but you introduce a child into the equation instinctively. For many parents, I would think they'd want to serve their child first for the same reasons that you might have mentioned. But the rational self-interest thing to do, if your interest is indeed that child, like you have a vested interest in that child, whether it's simply just passing your genes along, right? Would be to serve yourself first so that you're better able to serve that child next. If you do that in the reverse order, something could go wrong. Actually, maybe it went right. Maybe you got that oxygen mask on the child survives the ordeal, whatever it is, but in the end you don't, because you didn't have enough time to serve yourself. And then the subsequent events that occur outside of that little catastrophe would not best serve that child, which was your ultimate self-interest. You ultimately had your self-interest rooted in anyway, like that child is now parentless and so on and so forth, right? So does that all make sense?
I want to give a somewght different example that I think might clarify my position. I'm not sure I've fleshed it out sufficiently to get the view across. So the view is not that you should always act in such a way that you preserve your own life rather than the life of someone else, such as your child. Like, for instance, take a lifeboat scenario. Let's say you're there's a lifeboat. There's the danger of drowning. It can only hold one person, and it's either you or your child who are hanging onto this lifeboat, and one of you has to let go. I mean, you could both drown, but it can only support one person at most. Now, I don't think it's the the objectivist view that you should necessarily not drown yourself. It might be that you should it's more in your own interest to allow yourself to drown and let your child have the lifeboat so that it survives. Now, why? Well, maybe your life without that child would just be so meaningless and miserable that the thought of letting your child drown might just haunt you for the rest of your life, such that it wouldn't be a life worth living without that child. So it could be that it's actually in your interest to just allow your own life to end in that case and let the child survive. I'm not saying that's necessarily the case, but it might be the case. So it's just not obvious in what you should do in any particular case. But whatever you should do, it should be that it serves your own interest. But there are some lives that are not worth living. So the fact that you're serving your own interest doesn't necessarily mean you're going to keep yourself alive and breathing under any conditions. So it's a more nuanced view, I think, than people often give it credit for. It's contextual, depends on the circumstances. But it's still true that everything grounds out in what actions you should do, the sort of action that makes your own life the best possible life. And if it's something that's not serving that end, then you shouldn't do it. In the going back to the oxygen mask case, I mean, we might be able to fill in the details of the case such that it is better to put the mask on the child first. But whatever's going to provide the reasoning for that is going to be that ultimately it's because it's best for yourself to have that rule in place that you put it on the child first. So it just depends on how we fill in the details, but ultimately everything grounds out in what enables you to live the happiest sort of life.
Sure, I'll just take this to mean that the analogy is, I guess, sound, because your lifeboat one wasn't really different other than it changed a variable. That in yours there was some certitude in the fact that only one person would survive the ordeal, where in mine that certainty was absent, and that was kind of the point. Um, and then you were describing changing the details. Like there's no, it's not necessary to change the details. All that's necessary is to figure out in this hypothetical situation what would be the rational, self-interested thing to do. And I didn't hear you say no, that putting your own mask on was incorrect, I suppose. It sounds to me that that is the correct thing to do, given the lack of detail that I gave, which again was the point. So we can probably move on from that, because I just want to make sure that I'm understanding through an analogy your worldview and objectivism correctly. So I think we got there.
Well, I don't. I just want to stay on this example at least a little bit more. I don't know that it's ethically correct to put your own mask on first. Because I don't know the reasoning behind that. So as I said before, I don't. The people who are telling you the instructions, they don't
They don't
give you a
matter.
reason as
Yeah.
to why you should put your own, or at least I don't recall right now them giving a reason. So I can I guess if I'm in this emergency scenario, I would follow the instructions and put my own mask on first, not because I necessarily agree that if I grilled them about their reasoning for doing it in that order, I might not agree if they had some kind of non-egoistic or altruistic justification for doing that. Like the reason you should put your own mask on first is because that will allow you to help others more, and that's what we should ultimately be concerned with, helping others. I would disagree with that. But if they had some other kind of reasoning, if they had an egoistic kind of reasoning behind that instruction, then I would agree with it. So I just don't know right now.
I think you're
I think
taking
the case is it's under described. We can't just know on the
exactly.
face of it whether it's the objectivist thing to do is to put your own mask on first. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We have to hear more about the reasoning behind it.
But we don't. That's why it's a hypothetical, and I gave you the reasoning. The reasoning I gave you, whether it's right or wrong in an actual plane that we got on today, it doesn't matter. The hypothetical I gave you was that just in the context of myself and the child, it would be and assuming that it is in my rational self-interest for that child to survive, even if I don't, it would still be in my best interest to put my mask on first, so that I can ensure that I'd save the child, rather than the reverse order, because there might be a question whether or not that even if I did save the child by putting their mask on first, I might not survive, but that ultimately might be okay. Or am I saying this right? Um, yeah, that could be okay, because that the end result is I wanted that child to survive more than I wanted myself to survive. That's all you need to know. And then I'm got super puzzled when you mentioned if you kind of if you were talking to, say, a flight attendant that was giving the instruction, and you found out that the ultimate reasoning behind them asking you to put your own mask on first was so that you can help others, and then you would disagree with that. What would be the inverse of that situation, to help others first so that you can ultimately help yourself? Like I got lost with that, because in that scenario, it sounds like you'd just be paralyzed as to what to do if you were told that.
Okay, a couple things. First, in what you just said, I think you were saying you were stipulating as part of the case that the reason you should put your own mask on first is because it's in your rational self-interest. So in that case, yeah, I would agree. If we're just stipulating that it is in your rational self-interest to put your own mask on first, then I would say, yeah, that's what you should do. Now, the next point you said you're puzzled by, if the flight attendant says the reason you should put your own mask on first is because then you're in a better position to help others, and I said I would reject that, at least as my ultimate reason. Like, I shouldn't primarily be concerned in my life with helping others. That's not my ultimate goal. My
Okay,
ultimate goal is to live the
let's say
best,
I'm the
happiest
one.
life for myself.
I understand that. Let's say I'm the flight attendant and I tell you, please put your mask on first in the event of this whatever emergency, right? And you ask me why. And I tell you some altruistic reason for it. You reject that reason. What are you going to do when the event comes, though?
I guess if I judge that it would be in my rational self-interest to put the other person's mask on first, then that's what I would do. Even though the flight attendant is telling me put your own mask on first for altruistic reasons, since I'm an egoist, I think it's best to pursue my own interest. And if I decide that for whatever reason it's in my own interest to put the other person's mask on first, then I'm going to disobey the flight attendant and put the other person's mask on first.
Okay, can you imagine a reason that you would do that, though? Or are you just hypothetically, like, are you just theoretically saying that exists?
Maybe I can, if you give me a second, maybe I can
Sure.
imagine. So why might I think it's in my rational self-interest to put someone else's mask on first? Um, let's say if I don't do it right away and help my child who's next to me, let's say that child is going to have a panic attack, and going to start acting wild, and it's going to be very difficult to get the mask on later if I don't do it right away. So my only chance to save the child is to do it right away. And I want us both to survive. And let's say I if I have to take a risk on one of us dying, I'd rather it be me, because, well, let's just say in this case, because it's like the lifeboat case I was describing, where without that child I would be miserable and it wouldn't be a life worth living. So I decide if only one of us is going to die, it's going to be me. And so I immediately help the child, um, because that's the only way I can assure it's going to get a mask on and be able to survive. Because if I don't do it immediately, it's going to start acting in a panicked way, and it's not going to be possible to get it on in time.
It sounds very weak to me because, like, it's not impossible to get a mask on a child. Like, you're claiming in this theoretical situation that it would be impossible, but I can't imagine a situation, even super panicked child, in which it's the word impossible should be invoked, right? And that's why in this analogy, you're clearly going to be on the clock, right? And if it's going to be difficult in any scenario to get that mask on the child, you're wasting time getting yours on yourself, and eventually you're going to pass out and you're going to have trouble, like, not just trouble, but it will be, now we'll use the word impossible to perform that action. So it just seems to me that it would always be in your rational self-interest to put yours on first, because this is like a couple second procedure, right? And then you can go on to do, like, it's not going to take you so much time to put your mask on that it will then life or death scenario for your child. Now they're in a super panicked mode where it becomes impossible to put theirs on. Like, that theoretical situation you painted, I don't think exists.
Well, you asked me to give you a case where I would disobey and put it on the other kid first. I mean, if you're
Sure, but maybe I should have
stipulating
asked for a
it,
practical case. even if it's
Well,
in theory.
maybe there isn't one. Maybe there isn't one. But to understand the principle, we have to adjust the details some so I can give you a case.
Yeah, and I was just addressing the details. I don't think the details exist in where your theoretical position would ever hold.
Well, I mean, if you're just stipulating as part of the example that my rational self-interest necessarily is going to involve putting my mask on first, then yeah, that's always what I'm going to do. But I thought you were asking for like, okay, well, what would ever be a case? Dream me up a case where you would put the other one. So I had to give an unrealistic example, but that was because of the constraints that I thought you were giving me.
I don't think you were so constrained that you had to give an unrealistic example. I just don't. I don't think I can be told otherwise, but I don't think an example such as that exists. That example clearly doesn't work for me, and I'm pretty sure you understand why as I described it. But that maybe we just, I don't know. It seems to me as though I kind of maybe found a way that or a scenario in which you kind of held to a principle even just for the sake of holding to it. It seems to me, which I don't know. I guess it could be fine. Doesn't seem that rational to me, I suppose. But you said something like you said it's true, and you were referring to, I guess, in a word, objectivism. It's true that you should do what best serves you. What? How can you justify that statement?
Hold on a minute. I want to go back to, you made a comment a few seconds ago about I'm holding to a principle just for the sake of holding to the principle or something. I mean, I don't follow that. Can you
Yeah, when we were talking
elaborate
about
on
the
that?
flight attendant, this is going back to when, if I, as the flight attendant, let's say, told you that the reasoning for putting your mask on first was altruistic in nature, you would reject that, and then you painted me the theoretical scenario in which you would disobey that if your rational self-interest was to take care of your child, and in your I thought crazy theoretical scenario was that the child could only be saved in that particular way by putting their mask on first and not taking care of yourself first. That seems to me just painting this picture that we paint. Well, the picture that I painted here for you. It seems that you were just holding to your rational self-interest principle in all scenarios, even rejecting and disobeying the flight attendant's instruction for the sake of holding to the principle, rather than just going with what seems to be practical. Because you might call everything you described as rational self-interest. I think I just call it practical. Like, put your mask on first. It's a couple second procedure. Then you can help others if you want to, if you think it better serves you and your rational self-interest. Any reason under the sun, you'll be able to affect as long as you're taken care of first, because we're talking about a couple second procedure that will ultimately let you perform whatever it is you want to perform.
Okay. One thought is there's no distinction between the moral and the practical, in my view. It's not that one thing is moral or rational and then some other thing, which is something different, is practical. On the objectivist view, those are always in alignments. The moral thing is what gets you to your goal. So it is practical if you define your goal appropriately. So if your goal is to live a happy life for yourself, then what's moral is what allows you to do that. What's practical is also what allows you to do that. They're never going to be pulling in different directions. People often think that there's some distinction between the moral and the practical, but I think that's because they have kind of a conflicted idea of what's is good, what their standard of value is. So if you think it's immoral to live like Mother Teresa and give up riches, live a life of poverty, give up your dreams and ambitions, then you might think that's not a practical way to live. If you think practical means living a successful in a conventional kind of sense of like making a lot of money, it's not practical to live like Mother Teresa. But if you don't accept Mother Teresa as your standard of what's moral, if you have as your standard something like living a happy life for yourself, then you're not going to be thinking it's impractical, or you will think it's practical to make a lot of money. But that's also moral. It's not moral to give away all your money to charity or to the poor. That's not necessarily a moral thing to do. We can get more into this, but I just wanted to make that point. There's no difference between the moral and the practical. Now, there was one other point I wanted to make in connection with the air mask example. Oh, it can be the case that like if the flight attendant tells me that the reason you should put your own mask on first is some altruistic reason, like it allows you to help others, I might judge that there's also egoistic reasons to do the same thing.
Right.
So I might think she's mistaken. Like I might agree that I should put my own mask on first, but for different reasons. I have egoistic reasons for
Yes.
putting my own mask on first. She gives me altruistic reasons for putting my own mask on first, but I'm going to go with the egoistic reasons. So, and this might help with your way of thinking. Like if you think it's just theoretically impossible or it's just too outlandish to suppose there is a case where it would be in your own self-interest to put the other person's mask on first, I can now say, okay, fine, I'll accept that. But then if I am going to put my own mask on first, it's going to be for my own egoistic reasons, not for the altruistic reasons that the flight attendant gives me. That was the only other point I wanted to add on that.
Yeah, I wish you would have said that first, because your instinct was to go, I'm going to disobey the reason I already know I disagree with. So that's what kind of feel like gummed up that part of the conversation a little bit. I'm aware that that exists. I already described that. I described it at the onset of when I gave you the analogy, just to, I think, see whether or not you thought that was an apt analogy, so you can understand that I understand your point of view. So, like, maybe can I just get a yes or no? Does that analogy work to describe what objectivism or rational self-interest entails? Just yes or no, or is it too complicated?
I think it's too complicated. I don't think we can take the air mask as we can't read too much into it. We need to know the reasoning behind the instructions. So,
as you said yourself, I stipulated the reasoning.
okay,
So
so I mean, if you're stipulating that the reasoning is that you should put it on yourself first because that's ultimately what's in your rational self-interest, then yeah, I can sign on to that. But then it's not. I
I'm
don't
not
know if I
asking you
would.
to sign on to, like, I'm trying to illustrate that I think I understand this worldview and this is how I can understand it. Do you think I understand it properly?
I'm not sure yet.
Okay. All right.
Because I mean, one reason I'm not sure is because you said before that you were puzzled when I said that I would disobey the flight attendant if she gave an altruistic reason.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why. You already described why, even because you could have easily said, well, I have my own egoistic reasons and self-interested reasons, rational self-interested reasons to do so. So I'll do it anyway, and these are some of the reasons why. But your instinct was to say, I'm going to disobey, which is what puzzled me. It just seemed to be like holding to a principle, no matter what the scenario entailed. It's just going to hold to that principle. It doesn't matter. You couldn't come up on your own with just the fact that, like, yeah, there's definitely reasons why I would do what she or he or whatever says, but not for their reasoning, for my own. That's what puzzled me.
Okay. I can see how that might be unclear. Like if I say disobey, um, you might think, well, that means that I'm not going to put on my own mask first. I'm going to put someone else's mask on
That's what
first.
that would mean.
Maybe I guess it would have been better to say I might or might not obey. I mean the issue is really not obedience. It's going by my own judgment. So I might or might not act in accord with what she says.
Right.
But if I do act in accord with what she says, it's going to be because it serves my own interest, not
Right.
because it serves someone else's interest. So maybe
Right.
that would have been a better way to put it than just disobey.
Absolutely. And I understand that, but we didn't need to go that far. All we really needed to do was, to the analogy without the flight attendant, even make sense in a way that clues you in that I am at least somewhat understanding the worldview. Maybe not completely, but somewhat. I'm getting there. I'm on the right track. I have a good springboard for it, maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, cool. All right. So we got there. So so I did have I'll just repeat the question again. You said it's true that you should do what best serves you. Um, how did you arrive to that statement? How can you justify that statement?
Okay. Um, I think this might get us into what's called metaethics. So
Okay.
what is the like the ultimate grounding of value claims of things that are what ultimately grounds saying that something is good or something you should do? I think the concept of good um or value ultimately derives from the experience of pleasure. I think that's where it ultimately comes from. And so I think we're just biologically built in such a way that certain things bring pleasure and other things don't or bring pain. So you're a baby, for instance, and warm milk might give you pleasure, at least when you're feeling hungry. And you have no choice about that. That's just the way you're built. And so scraping your knee on a rock just feels painful, and you have no choice about that. And I think these experiences are what's ultimately ground the notion of good and bad. That is the experiences of pleasure and pain. So I guess there's a question you could ask. Well, why should you do what's pleasurable? And by the way, this concept of pleasure can eventually expand to others, like psychological pleasure, not just physical pleasures like drinking milk or eating food. It can
Mhm.
encompass psychological pleasures like the experience of happiness you get when you marry the person of your dreams or you get a raise at your job. This can cause not physical pleasure, but maybe it causes psychological pleasure. But the way it starts out, I think, is just with physical pleasure. That's the simplest kind of pleasure. Uh, so you can ask, well, why should you pursue pleasure? Um, in there, I think it might just be self-evidence. Like I can't really give a reason beyond just have some of it, experience it. You'll see why it's something worth pursuing.
You just take it as an
Why?
axiom.
What's that?
You just take it as an axiom that you should pursue pleasure.
Kind of. I'm not sure I exactly want to put it that way, but maybe something at least in that ballpark. Like there's not an infinite regress of explanation that can be given. Um, I think this is one of those starting points Like I don't know what I could say to persuade someone of why they should pursue pleasure other than just say, go have some of it. You'll see what it's like and why it's worth pursuing.
Well,
If someone never had,
that's fair enough. But that's why
Hmm.
I didn't ask you like why is it that you should? I asked about you saying it's true that you should. You're claiming that it's in fact true that you should. So how did you arrive there?
um, I'm not clear on the distinction between saying you should do something and it's true that you should do something.
I'll give you it because you can give
Okay.
me a million reasons that I'll just take a face value. Yeah, like I should pursue sex because it makes my lowings feel good. Like it's in accordance with my biology to do a ton of things to eat, to satiate my hunger, to just hey, pursue some kind of thrill and get a hit of dopamine. Like it serves my biology to do those things. That therefore I should do it just because those facts exist. But is it in fact true that I should do those things? Or are there other, like, to kind of frame it in the opposition, could it in fact be true that I shouldn't pursue some of those things in for X, Y, and Z reasons? I don't know, but according to your statement, it would not be true. You're saying it is in fact true that I should pursue what serves me, and you're using the example of pleasure in this, which is fine.
Okay. I'm unclear where we are here. Um, I'm not sure how to process what you just said. I mean, there's some ultimate uh choice one has to make, which I think maybe this is getting at what's called the primary choice in the objectivist literature. Sometimes there's this basic choice we have between life and death. And once you choose one way on that question, many other things follow. Like if you choose life, then you should do certain other things like eat, because you have to eat in order to live. But there's there's nothing that can ground that primary choice, the choice to live. Um, but that doesn't mean it's an arbitrary choice. At least that's a claim that's made in the objectivist literature, that it's not an arbitrary choice, um, because arbitrary presupposes you've already made a choice to live or to accept the realm of reality. That's another way it's sometimes put. Um, so I think maybe what you're getting at is the status of the primary choice, or what I'm calling the primary choice in ethics. Um,
If you're saying that ultimately, yeah, that primary choice is unjustified, I think that's an acceptable answer. That doesn't mean I have to accept it myself, but ultimately, when you already mentioned we're getting into metaethics, someone who's getting into a conversation like this is going to have to make a choice whether or not they ground a statement like that in an unjustified belief, in circular reasoning, or some kind of infinite regress. So it sounds like you've kind of grounded it in ultimately an unjustified belief, which is fine because you're going to arrive there eventually. So I was just curious where you'd go.
Maybe it's unjustified is the right term, but I'm not sure. Um,
Well, we can explore
in
it.
Oh yeah, maybe we should do that. Um,
Yeah.
I don't think it's arbitrary though. Uh, for reasons I was starting to give, and we could talk more about it. But there's I guess there might be an implication that it's irrational if you say it's unjustified, but I'm reluctant to say it's irrational. Um, but so you want to dig into this issue some more now, or
We could if you'd like. I think I got my answer, and I'm not dissatisfied with the answer. You know, that's just where it landed.
okay? Now, so, if you think that in in my view or the objectivist view, maybe I should only speak for me. um, there's an ultimate choice which is unjustified. Does that mean that, do you take that to mean that there's something subjective or irrational or arbitrary about my view?
Not necessarily. Could be the case, but not necessarily. Um, there could be other reasons why I might state that, but this would not the ultimate grounding for all of the ethics and the metaethics and all that's not why I would say that. No.
Okay. So I guess maybe another way to put my question is, do you see it as some kind of problem if I say that the ultimate or primary choice is unjustified?
No, because as I described before, if I posed a similar question to anyone regarding any grounding for their ethics, metaethics, or whatever, they will have to arrive at one of those three endpoints. It seems as though, to me, from my experience, that most people arrive at where you arrived. So it's not even uncommon. Um, so yeah, that's why I wouldn't call it necessarily irrational.
Because most people arrive at that sort of view?
Not because most people arrive, but there seems to be a reason, I suppose, that most people arrive at an unjustified belief. I could think of a ton of reasons. It could be laziness, because I mean, it could be it's a little bit more comfortable to not have to ultimately justify their beliefs. Um, because ultimately, when you get down this fundamental, it's probably better just to say I don't know, and that's my opinion. But from my experience, a lot of people don't like to say that they don't know. That's an uncomfortable thing in experience for them. Um, but that doesn't mean that any one of the other two paths are any better. I might like one over the other, but that's my taste, my preference. Um, yeah. We probably got like way fundamental, way quick, and unnecessarily so, even perhaps.
I think this is actually interesting. I'm interested in digging into this some more. But if you want to go in a different direction,
No,
we
no,
can
yeah,
also.
let's hang out here. Yeah, let's hang out here.
Okay. So, um, I guess one thing you said is, when you say I don't know that there's anything to be known once you're at this level. Like, if you say I don't know, it might imply there's some kind of deficiency. So, um, whereas if it's just if it's a primary choice, then there's not really anything more to be known. So you've hit rock bottom, and there's nowhere further to go. So there's no kind of deficiency in knowledge such that you would justify saying I don't know.
Well, the I don't know would be regarding that primary choice. Where did that come from? How do you justify it?
Okay, but then are you assuming there needs to or could be a justification?
No, not necessarily. But the question remains.
as to whether there is one?
Because if you're stipulating that there isn't, then that needs to be justified. There needs to be some kind of support for that. Otherwise, it's just a claim. This is, I'll liken it to if we were talking about God and whether or not he exists. This is almost analogous to like the first mover argument and what is it called? Contingency argument kind of a thing.
I'm thinking of something, not exactly God, but the universe. Often, theists will say you need a God to explain where the universe came from, but that assumes that it wasn't eternal, that it came from somewhere. I am of the view that the universe is eternal.
Okay, I find that very interesting.
So maybe if we talk about that, maybe that will shed some light on the other issue.
I would hope so. This is why I find it interesting and this is why I drew an analogy between the two, is because ultimately you're rooting your ethics, it sounds to me, if I'm following you correctly, in a like a primary choice to be made, when that choice is to choose your own rational self-interest, I suppose. That I was kind of stipulating seems to be an unjustified belief. And as I described to you beforehand, when it comes to any metaphysical kind of discussion, ultimately one is going to arrive at either an unjustified belief, some kind of circular reasoning where A because B and B because A, or an infinite regress. Now, you just described to me when we were talking about, I suppose, the origins of the universe and maybe a God started or not, you're more of the mind that the universe is internal. That's an infinite regress. So you landed on the infinite regress for the explanation of, everything, I suppose, but you landed in an unjustified belief with your metaethics. And that's what's so interesting to me is that, typically speaking, actually, I think you're the only person I've ever met that's arrived on these two different conclusions. They're usually people. I hesitate to use the word usually. My experience is that always someone arrives all of their answers, whether you're talking about ethics or origins of the universe, in one of those three paths. They're usually congruent with one another. And again, typically it's the unjustified belief realm, which is why I wasn't surprised if you got there. So now I am surprised that you're in two different kind of realms with things that are actually similar.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying, but I actually don't see myself as being in the infinite regress camp, so to speak, when it comes to the universe. I don't think of the universe as infinite, either in time or in space. I think of it as the concept time doesn't apply to the universe as a whole. No, nor does the concept of space. I think Aristotle might have made this point. Those concepts, time and space, only apply within the universe. Like you can say, how far is Toledo, Ohio from New York City? And you can measure that in terms of miles. But can you say, like, how far is the universe from what? There is nothing else.
Right.
Space only is something that exists as a relationship between things that exist in the universe, but there's no relation between the universe, which by definition, as I understand it, is everything. There's no distance between everything and something else. If there were something else, then the so-called everything wouldn't be everything yet. It would already include the something else. So the concept of time or space or time doesn't apply to the universe as a whole. Like, to take a temporal example, you could say, how long has it been since your birthday? And you can measure, it's been 10 days, has it been 85 days? But if you say, how long has it been since your birthday and the start, or how long has it been since the universe came into existence and this other and something else, but there is no something else. If the universe is everything, There's nothing else that you can measure a time distance between.
You can measure the time distance between your birthday and say the Big Bang, though. Even though
Yeah,
that might
but the
be
Big
sort
Bang
of,
is not the beginning of the universe.
I didn't claim it was though.
Yeah, just
Um,
clarifying for anybody who might think that, because that's
I
a
think
very common
I
thing
think
for people to think.
no, yeah, obviously, it's just the trying to draw the universe as we understand it, even referring to the beginning of the universe is sort of nonsensical.
I
I think
agree.
we agree on that. Okay, cool. That doesn't mean that space and time don't apply to it, though they clearly do, which is why you can measure between, say, the Big Bang, even if it might be inaccurate because physics starts to break down and such. We can choose a point where it's as close as it can be to that, maybe, and your birthday. Um, but I still, it seems as though still that you do land in the infinite regress, because we know that there was some sort of Big Bang. We'll just describe it as that. We're not physicists, so, and even the physicists don't have it completely figured out. But we know there's something like that happened, right? um that this is where almost language breaks down with it, because there was clearly some sort of before, even if using that word doesn't quite make sense, and I think we both kind of understand that too. That's why the word infinite in the infinite regress is the appropriate word. um Otherwise you're landing in that unjustified belief camp when it comes to your view on the universe as well. And now I'm kind of confused about your view on the universe a little bit, even though it seems to be similar as mine, as physicists and such. You seem to dislike or are averse to the idea that you might be beholden to like an infinite regress with it. You had a contention with that, and I don't understand why.
Okay. Before I get to that, I just want to say one other thing, which maybe this is just more for the audience. So the Big Bang is often cited as the beginning of the universe, but what I would say is it's not the beginning of the universe. That's just when the universe changed its form. So if it was before the Big Bang, it was what's called the singularity, a very super dense packed kind of matter. Then that matter exploded. So there was just a change in form of the matter. It expanded. But that wasn't the beginning of existence. That was just when existence changed its form in a certain way. Okay. So, but I'm saying that it's not infinite in time. I think this relates to the law of identity. A is A, which actually came up in my latest call with Sam Seder on the Majority Report, although we didn't discuss it in connection with this sort of example. But to be is to be something. To elaborate a little more, to be is to be something in particular. So, like this leaf here, right? It's got a certain color, right? It's not no color. You can't say there's a leaf, but it has no color. So it's got to be some color. It's got to be either green or red or orange, right? But it's got to have some color. It's also got to have some size. It can't be neither 2 inches, nor 3 inches, nor 6.5 inches. It has to have some length in order to be at all. So that's what I mean when in an example of what I mean when I say to be is to be something, or to be something in particular. You can't just be without being anything in particular. And I guess when it comes to the universe, I would say it can't be if it's not well, I don't want to say, so that I was saying before the oh no, not to, I don't want to go back to the universe yet. I want to talk about infinite. So the idea of infinity is of something that's no particular size, whether size of length or size of time. It's nothing in particular. Now, I think maybe it could be called what's called in objectivist literature a concept of method. So in certain branches of math like calculus, you use infinity, and methodological tool, but it doesn't refer to something in reality, in the way that like table does or human being, or take negative numbers. There's -5, right? In reality, there's not less than nothing. There's not even nothing at all. This is the principle from Parmenides, ancient Greek philosopher. He says, what is, what is not, is not. There is no nothing. And if a negative number is supposed to be less than nothing, well, there's even more reason to think there's not that. But we can still use negative numbers as a tool of calculation, but that doesn't mean like metaphysically it corresponds to something in reality. And I think likewise with something like infinity, it could be a tool of method without corresponding to something that exists in reality. If it's got to actually exist in reality, then it has to be something in particular, which infinity is not.
Okay.
I don't know if maybe that was too abstract or unclear or floating,
No,
but
I just don't
anyways,
know kind of what it had to do with you deciding or not deciding to kind of land in the infinite regress camp when it comes to the origins of the universe. It still sounds as though you do. Everything you just described would tell me that you do.
an infinite regress for the origin of the universe. Well, that whole segment was to say why I oppose or am not comfortable with the concept of infinity if it's meant to correspond to some actual trait or attribute in reality, as opposed to being some methodological tool.
Yeah, it's a methodological tool, correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if that's the case, then it can't be an actual attribute of something that exists, like of the universe.
How am I saying that it's an attribute of the universe? I'm saying that you fall within a train of thought that is necessarily an infinite regress regarding the origins of the universe. Or you can correct me and show me what your unjustified belief is regarding the origins of the universe.
Well, I don't think there is an origin of the universe. So
yeah,
I think
that term is also kind of like a crap term, but I think we both understand what I mean by that.
Well,
Because if you're saying there's no origin of the universe, that would just be another point in what I'm trying to tell you is that you fall within it. It's an infinite regress to it physically.
So my problem with using the term origin is that it has a temporal.
I know.
And I'm in part of my view is the universe is outside of time. Eternal is literally etymologically what it means.
We agree, and I already just told you it's a crap term, so maybe I'll stop using it. But,
okay.
Your view about the universe necessitates that there's an infinite regress to it, or you can correct me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't see that my view implies there's an infinite regress.
So please correct me.
Well, I guess I want to know why you think my view does imply that. I'm not clear on that.
Everything you described seems to describe it that way. Another easy way to describe the universe is that it was created by, say, a god, but that would land you in and that's the whole first mover thing I mentioned. That would land you in an unjustified belief, right? Or you can almost can't think of anyone that I've spoken to that does this. You can claim that the universe was I guess you could say like born out of itself, which is it's a super strange way to even say it. And then you refer to that like itself as though it's another thing. Like so, universe A was born out of kind of universe B, and it's like where did that universe come from? Well, it came from A, and then you just got this circular reasoning. It's not too different from the infinite regress. You're just referring to two different things, then they play off of each other. Maybe I could just ask you, okay. But I gotta. Okay. It's I don't want to ask the question of what happened before the Big Bang because I already know that's a dumb question. But see, you described it as it just changed form, right? Well, what was the form before the form we're in now? Because change, now you use the word change, that necessitates time, right? So time is introduced into the universe already with that change. So maybe it just eternally existed, which you claimed it did. I believe that as well. But that is the infinite regress. Eternity is infinite, correct?
Mm, I I doubt that. I mean, I don't. So maybe that's the root of our difference here is that I'm not seeing. I don't think eternity and infinity are the same concept, or that one, or that eternity implies infinity. Whereas I think it sounds like maybe you do think that if something is eternal, then that implies it's infinite.
Well, how would you define eternity then?
It's maybe it's just kind of defined negatively, like out of time. It's eternal. So that's the Latin, I think. So just etymologically, it just means not in time.
Yeah,
So,
and infinity is out of time as well, correct?
well, if we're doing the etymology, it's not finite. It's just a
Right.
negation of
So if we okay,
finitude.
if we are describing time in terms of infinity, then it would be eternal, right?
If we're describing time in terms of infinity,
Yeah, if we're trying to put, because I could say there's an hour of time, or a day of time, or a year of time, or a decade of time. But if I want to describe time in terms of infinity rather than those classifications of time, what's the word you would use for that?
uh, I
We
don't.
both said it a couple times already.
What?
The word is eternal.
The word is eternal. If you want to, sorry, could you say the last thing you said again?
Sure. So if I want to classify time in hours, I can say 10 hours. If I want to classify it in days, I can say 10 days, or years, 10 years. But if I want to classify it in terms of, if I want to refer to it in terms of, I shouldn't use the word classify. So let me start over. If I want to refer to time in terms of hours, I could say 10 hours. In terms, if I want to refer to it in terms of days, I could say 10 days, and years, 10 years. If I want to refer to time in terms of infinity, the word for that is eternal. That's the only word I'm aware of that works for that.
It seems like maybe what you're doing there is you're treating infinity on a par with days, hours, seconds, minutes,
No,
as though it's another type of unit of
no,
measurement.
that's no, I'm clearly not. That's why I used, if you want to say that the unit of measurement I used for infinity was eternal, that I guess you could say is fine, but that is not a unit of measurement, right? I got away from unit of measurements when I went to infinity, and I used a word that is eternal because it refers to time in a without end.
Well, I agree. It's not. I think I agree with. I think we're in agreement that infinite or infinity is not a unit of measurement in the way that seconds or days is. I also don't think eternal is a unit of measurement in the way, at least not in the way that seconds or days is.
Uh,
Or do we agree on that?
we agree.
Okay. So, where do we go from there?
Well, you were having contention with the whole infinite regress thing, and you just wanted to refer to the universe as eternal, as though the two words eternal and infinite were just so almost like divorced from each other that we couldn't refer to them that way. And I'm trying to illustrate to you that they're not. Um, you seem to clearly view the universe, as you state, as eternal, which would mean it has an infinite regress to it.
Okay, so if I say the universe is eternal, another way to put that is I don't think time applies to the universe.
Mhm.
Just like if I say, how heavy is your belief that 2 + 2 is 4? Weight just doesn't apply to things like beliefs. I mean, unless you're a materialist, you're a physicalist, maybe you think it does, but
I don't
um,
think they do either, though.
if you're hopefully people can at least follow the example, even if they want to try to give a physicalist or materialist view of it. But anyways, you get the idea that there are certain concepts that just don't apply to things, given their nature. Or how confused is an atom? Like atoms aren't the sort of thing that can be confused, right? They don't have minds, right? So likewise, I want to say time doesn't apply to the universe.
Yeah, can I stop you? Because I agree, and I know that you agree with what the statement you're about to make. That's why the word infinite is being invoked and the word internal is being invoked here, because they are not temporal. They are not units of measurement.
But
We agree on.
doesn't that mean though that um, if I say finitude does not apply to the universe, I I don't agree with that. I
You
think it
don't agree that.
is it's finite, but what does that mean exactly?
Wait, did you say that you believe that the universe is finite? Did I hear that right?
Yes. Yes,
Okay,
that's my
now I'm completely confused.
okay.
I get so I mean I'm not confused about your contention with the word infinite now, but I don't understand how you can believe something that is eternal is also finite.
Okay. This is something that I have not practiced explaining much. So
Mhm.
I don't know if I can give a clear explanation. This is pretty cutting edge territory for me. Um, but what does it mean to say something is finite? Does that just mean it has an identity? Um, or is it something more specific than that? I I think it might be
Limited.
at least a little more specific than that, but not so specific that it has something to do with having a certain size or having a certain duration. I think it, well, maybe we should, or maybe I should try to just give this sort of understanding of what it means to say something like something is finite. So let's say all it means is something has an identity. Just like I was saying with the leaf, right? It would have no identity if it weren't 6 inches or 3.5 inches or some length, right? It's got to have some size. Now, size, I'm not saying that particular attribute applies to the universe as a whole, but it has some attributes. Maybe all we can say when we're at this broad of a level of talking about the universe as a whole, WHOLA, not H. Um, Maybe the only attribute we can give to the universe as a whole is that it has identity. It's something in particular. Um, well, I mean, we could say like it's something which includes me, Dan Norton. It's something which includes Bryan. So I mean, we can't specify it more in certain ways. It's something which has umbrellas and microphones. Um, But I think to say that something is finite is to say that it has a certain identity, but not necessarily a temporal or spatial identity. And so if that's true, then it could be the case that the universe is finite but eternal.
Okay. I'm going to say this kind of in jest, but it sounds like you're sort of a deist, but your deity is the universe.
Well, I guess it depends what you mean by a deity.
Right. It's just I would have just said deist and left out the second half of that comment, but you've already described to me enough about what you believe about the universe, and I know you're describing the universe right now, so that's why I said that thing is that deity is the universe. But in reality, it just sounds like you're talking about deism.
Well, so the let me say something about that. So deism is the idea, as I understand it, that there is a God who created the universe and then just kind of stepped away and doesn't interfere with it through miracles, for example. I think some of the founding fathers held this sort of view. But you need some kind of divinity to get the universe which we see with our eyes into existence. It's not, it can't just exist on its own. You need something else beyond the sorts of things we see with which we sense with our five senses in order to get what we sense with our five senses into existence. But I think it's unjustified to think that that the universe is not self-sufficient, so to speak, that you need something beyond it, like a God, to bring it into existence. Now, whether it then steps out of the picture and just leaves the universe to go on its own or not, I think that's a secondary issue. I don't think you need a God at all to get universe into existence. I think the idea that it has to come from somewhere is invalid. So I don't think my view is like deism, because I don't think there has to be some divine mind to bring the world that we sense into existence. I don't think it's unjustified to think that it needs to come from somewhere.
Yeah, I believe you, and I also believe that everything you described is unjustified as well. Um, when you were describing the universe coming into being as it is now, you described it as being kind of having a change from one form to another. So maybe what I should have said is you're almost describing some kind of like pantheism, like the universe is God, and that form before was God and it changed into the universe or something like that. And the only reason why I'm talking this way though is because you're describing the universe as though it's you use the word finite, and has identity, has certain attributes, but is yet eternal, and that just rings of some sort of theism, deism, pantheism, whatever to me, because everything as we understand it just physically is that the universe is in fact infinite, not finite. Whether it's
You said everything we understand physically tells us it's infinite.
yes, well, to be fair, it's more of a question mark, but the infinity and an infinite regress to it seems to me, by everything I understand about it physically, seems to be the case.
I don't think it's a scientific question as to whether the universe is infinite. I think of it more as a philosophical sort of question.
It is, yes, but the physics arrives us at that philosophical discussion, and I think the only honest take on it is that there's an infinite regress to it, because to say any of your other choices are some kind of circular reasoning or an unjustified belief. I don't feel comfortable with either of those. I feel more comfortable with and honest about saying, no, there's some infinite regress. going on here?
Well, I mean, I certainly don't think there's anything dishonest about holding that the universe is eternal, um, and finite. I mean, I'm not deliberately lying here. I'm
No,
not
it's not
deliberately
really.
saying what I think is false. I mean, maybe I'm mistaken, but you say dishonest, that implies that someone is knowingly saying something false. I'm
I'd
certainly
never
not
use
doing
the word.
that.
I never use the word dishonest. I said I think the honest take. You can. I see why you used that word, but I feel as though the honest take is that take. That's not to say that I believe someone else isn't necessarily being dishonest. Saying like if I'm feeling honest, I go this direction. Okay. Um, but again, you seem to me to be going that direction as well. But you're you have these weird aversions to it. And then, yeah, I've never heard anyone say that the universe is finite except people that are toying with some sort of deism, theism, and they're not referring to the universe necessarily. Um, no, it's strange to me, anyway.
Okay, so well, a couple points. One is there's it sounds like maybe you're drawing a distinction between not honest and dishonest. I guess maybe I was saying like, okay, well, if you think the other positions, there's only one honest position, but the others are, I guess, the others would then be not honest, but you're not saying they're dishonest.
No, you didn't hear
Um,
me. You didn't hear me. I said if I'm talking about me, I feel honest with this direction. That's not to say that anyone else is dishonest. But it has to do with my honesty.
okay. Um, okay, sure. I mean, I'm happy just to talk in terms of what's true or false or right or wrong. I don't think we need to bring honesty into it, but if you want to, okay. Um,
Well, how do you know what's true or false or right or wrong when it comes to these discussions, though? That's what we're talking about. I mean, that literally this whole this rabbit hole of conversation we've kind of been on was contingent on me asking you a statement that you made, which was prefaced with "It's true," right? So that we were that's what we're talking about, true, false. But I'm asking you to justify this. That's why we got here. How do we justify claims like that? But I think, and it's been fun, but we probably got way down the rabbit hole on this metaphysics stuff when we were probably supposed to be more closely talking about objectivism and such. And it has been like an hour and a half. Would you be opposed to having a part two at some point?
no, I'm not opposed to that. Um, did you, I guess I would be up for continuing now, but if you don't want to continue now, then yeah, we could set up another time to continue later.
I probably got like another half an hour at most, which I'm perfectly happy to stay for.
Okay.
I'd probably like to get more back to the objectivism though.
Well, this is
Ex
part of objectivism. I mean, it's not a part that's well known or is discussed very much, but
Mhm.
objectivism is a complete philosophy and it includes views on metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, politics, and aesthetics. And we've spent a lot of time in the metaphysics, but it is part of objectivism. It's just not very well known.
Sure, yeah. What I think I meant to say is more part of how that how the philosophy on the whole translates to the real world, practically speaking, maybe in politics and such. Um, I should probably read up a little bit more on the metaphysics of it, though. I probably could stand to learn a lot there, to better understand you. Um,
There is a resource online called the Ayn Rand Lexicon, which
mm,
includes many quotes and excerpts from her work. And if you look that up, it's free. It used to just be a book that you had to purchase, but it's all free online now. And if you look up certain concepts like infinity, there's an entry there that includes some passages. Some of them are from Leonard Peikoff, who was a student of Ayn Rand. He worked closely with her for decades. He was her foremost student. So some of the passages what we've been talking about might be from him, but she endorsed his lecture course on objectivism, in which he might have discussed some of these topics. But anyways, I think that's a good resource
Yeah, thank you.
to learn more about objectivism.
Okay.
But yeah, if you want to go back to some other issues, then that's fine. I'm happy to follow you there. I was happy though to get some new sort of material on my channel, like
Yeah,
assuming this is published, because I don't think I've talked about, at least certainly not in this level of detail, about some of these issues. And I was also wondering, I don't know if you don't want to say, that's fine, but I'm just curious um, to know a little bit more about your backgrounds. Like, did you study some of this in school, or you just do it as a hobby, or what? If you want to say anything.
yeah, sure. I have some college experience, no degree, and I took some philosophy courses, and I've always been interested in philosophy and uh let's call it God talk, like some kind of pursuit of spirituality even, and how all that informs politics. Probably getting a little bit more into it lately, just watching some debates and just listening and reading some certain people, and that's kind of how I came across you. As you mentioned in the beginning, about seeing you on David Pakman. I do listen to him mostly daily. He's probably the only, let's say, left wing progressive type person that I listen to like that regularly. I try to the best I can, be a little bit avoidant of people who I, let's say, agree with, though, because I don't want to like silo myself and be in that kind of like echo chamber. I mostly listen to people who I disagree with, um, so I can kind of challenge my beliefs and whatnot. I have my reasons why I kind of landed on him as a daily, which maybe not appropriate for the discussion. I don't know, but yeah, there's exactly, and all that's exactly why I wanted to kind of talk to you, because if I had to make have a stance about objectivism, as far as I can tell, I'm not for it, I guess. Not necessarily, I don't know if opposed to it would be correct, because I clearly don't know enough about it, but it doesn't seem to be in congruence with my politics. So I'm interested to explore it more for that reason.
Okay, sure. So politically, you would say, well, actually, one thing before that, you said you haven't read Ayn Rand before?
No.
Haven't?
Read
Okay.
about the material, some summarizations and such, but not the actual material. No.
Okay. Um, she often does get mischaracterized, so I think it's really important to, if you want to know her view, to actually go to the source.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and okay, so politically, would you say you're like sort of aligned with Pakman, like progressive left?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So we can talk about politics. I'll let you lead it off, like whatever specific direction you want to go in. Go for it.
Um. Well, I think I might kind of sort of pose it back to you. Is there what let's say objections would objectivists have with progressivism on any particular issue?
Well, the fundamental issue in political philosophy is the issue of coercion. So it's the and there's a whole philosophy that underlies this, a metaphysics and epistemology and an ethics. But once you get up to politics, there's a fundamental issue of how should you interact with other human beings? Should you interact with them by force? So if I want something from you, there's two ways to get it. I can either offer you something in trade. I want to buy your car, let's say. I can offer you money for your car, or I can just steal it. I could use force. I can bash you over the skull and, just take your keys and drive away with it. And objectivism's view is that it's best for people to interact with each other in a voluntary way, not in a coercive way by using force. And that implies that there shouldn't be anything like taxation, where the government is coercing people to give up some of their earnings to the governments to to do whatever with. So, and this is not limited to progressives, but almost everyone believes that there should be taxation, which is a form of coercion, and objectivism opposes that. Also, regulations. There shouldn't be regulatory bodies like OSHA or FDA, SEC, which coerce businesses to act in certain ways. Now, there should be laws. Objectivism is opposed to anarchy. There should be a government which has laws, but those laws should be limited to protecting people from force in one way or another. Fraud is a form of force. We can talk some about that. So there will be laws, but all the laws will be forms of allowing people to act with each other in a voluntary, non-coercive way. So that's a very fundamental way that objectivism differs from progressives, who do want there to be things like taxation and regulations. But of course, it's not just progressives. Even conservatives want some amount of taxation and regulation.
Okay, so yeah, you object to taxation on the basis of it's coercive. On
one level, I mean, there's deeper objections to it, but that's kind of the political perspective.
Yeah. You said, yeah, you'd rather there be voluntary, kind of like trade and such. Is taxation not sort of a trade in a sense where like you give up these predetermined amount of taxes to the government, and the government in turn does X, Y, and Z for not just you, but the public? I know that's not strictly speaking trade, but it's not as though they're not getting anything for it.
Right. Sometimes you will get benefits from the money that is coercively taken from you. Sometimes you don't. But that doesn't justify the coercion, the fact that sometimes you do get a benefit. Like if I get mugged on the street and then someone decides to give me half of my money back, that doesn't.
No, it's
but
I mean, I find it. You mentioned that people strawman Ayn Rand, and all I'm hearing are strawmans of what government is and taxation is right now. You're likening it to a mugging, and I've never felt mugged being taxed, so why draw that analogy? No, the idea behind the taxation is, and to be fair, yeah, maybe a person in particular doesn't see every dollar that they were taxed back, but that's not the point of the taxation. The point of the taxation is to provide public benefit, and if you don't benefit yourself from the certain government programs or whatever it is that they're doing are at the time, then sort of so be it. But it's you interacting as a part of the public with the general society. And I would argue that I don't think there is a person in existence that necessarily doesn't benefit from the public programs that are being implemented through taxation. And like the obvious one is public roads, just roads. Like, why not just stop there? Like, we all use the roads, right? So it is a straw man the way you framed it that way. It's not the government just as a mugger deciding to give half your money back just because, and they didn't have a gun to your face. I know where you'll probably go with it is that if you don't ultimately pay your taxes, someone with a gun will come and try to cart you off to jail. Like, okay, that's sort of a different discussion. And we might find agreement in some of that discussion even, I think. But I think that's kind of as an aside. So I guess my question to you is, why do you feel the need to strawman what government and taxation is?
Nice loaded question there.
I mean, I feel like you did all the loading for me.
Well, of course you do. And I'm going to say it's not a straw man.
Okay, can you explain how that's not a straw man? Because I explained to you how it is.
I mean, of course it's not. exact. It is an analogy.
No analogy is exact. They all break down. You don't have to tell me this.
Right. So the point in common is that coercion is being used, and as you said, well, yeah, maybe eventually someone will take you off to jail if you don't pay your taxes. Well, yeah, that's the issue. I don't get to decide what I do with the money, at least not all the money that I earn. Some of
And
it
there's going to be
is,
straw man though. You do have a part in deciding that though. Do you know you're not aware there's voting? Like, why do
of
you
course, I'm aware
conveniently?
there's voting,
Yeah, but why do you
but
conveniently
I don't think
disregard that
vote.
fact?
What?
Why do you conveniently disregard that fact? You didn't mention anything about people being able to vote for politicians or laws or ordinances or anything of the sort.
Maybe because I don't think it's relevant.
It's completely
I
relevant.
mean, if you say
You
I'm
can decide
conveniently disregarding, it sounds like I'm cherry picking or evading something that I shouldn't be. I mean, I have reasons for the views I hold, and we can explore those. But I mean, uh, you're just assuming that I'm evading something. Why don't we just talk about voting? If you think that's relevant, we can talk about it and
okay,
we can
let's talk about it then.
discuss. All right.
Because you said that you don't get to decide, but you know that you have a part in deciding though, right?
There are certain things that we can vote for,
Mhm.
but I don't think that's uh I think there are some things that shouldn't be subject to a vote,
Such as
such as whether we coerce someone. Um,
I
Take
agree.
Socrates is a famous example of what I think is wrong with unlimited democracy. You know, if the majority of Athenians think that he's a nuisance for going around challenging people's ideas and they want to put him to death, and then a majority votes that he should be put to death, is that justified because the majority wanted it? I don't think so. If a majority of whites in the in the United States wants to enslave the blacks, and maybe should they be able to do that? I don't think so. I think there's a more fundamental principle called individual rights, which I think voting has to accommodate itself to. And if a certain sort of action violates the rights of individuals, which I think every time you coerce an individual, I think you're violating his rights, then I don't think people should be able to vote on whether it's okay to do that. So that's why I think something like taxation shouldn't be subject to a vote, because it's like getting it's mob rule basically. If you just let whatever the majority wants go for, and maybe you don't exactly endorse mob rule, but I think a lot of the arguments I have with people on the left, I think this issue of, well, what if people vote for it, that comes up, and maybe this is coming up again here. So I would just say that I think certain things shouldn't be voted on because they violate rights.
I agree. Yeah, I don't know why you brought up all these arguments you have with people on the left that aren't present right now.
Well, it
um,
seemed you were making a similar argument, and even
in
if
what
you weren't, you know, many people listening to this, probably that sort of thinking was going on in their minds.
uh, I don't know why you're invoking these theoretical people either. They're not here. I can't recall a single word that I said that would lead you to say all those words you just did though.
I think it's pretty straightforward. You talked about voting and how it's relevant, and I'm telling you why I think it's not relevant in certain cases.
Okay, let's square one it because you said that you shouldn't be coerced to pay taxes on things that you basically have no say in. I only brought up the word voting because that's clearly an example of a way that you have a say in those things, which I thought was conveniently disregarded. And then you went down this rabbit hole just now discussing mob rule, which again, that's what I'm asking about. What way did I clue you in that I believe in mob rule? Because I don't. And presumably, we're talking sort of within the context of maybe the United States of America. And you're well aware we have a Bill of Rights, we have all kinds of amendments, we have protections in the ways that you describe them. Like they currently exist. Maybe they don't exist in the full form that you would like them. They certainly don't exist in the full form that I would like them. That, but we clearly have a disagreement, probably on taxes in particular. You seem to maybe you would like some sort of amendment kind of doing away with taxes. Maybe that would make you kind of a little bit more happy with the country we live in, I suppose. Of course, that's going to have all kinds of repercussions that maybe we can discuss. But yeah, that's I feel very straw man. I do. And you did it in a way that you had discussions with other people, and so I get it that you didn't actually straw man me, but there's no need to invoke other people. It's just you and me here. Um, so where do we go from here now regarding the taxes? Um, let me see if I can I'm going to assume, but just correct me. Do you believe, because you believe in government, like there should be some form of government, as you described it already. I don't even need to rehash it. It's a very limited form of government. It needs to be funded in some way. So I suppose you would want this government funded completely voluntarily by donation, I suppose. Is that right?
That's one possibility, but there's other ways it could be funded, like through lotteries. Ayn Rand has an article called Government Financing in a Free Society, where she discusses ways that governments can be financed in a voluntary way. And I refer people to that article. But donations is one way. Lotteries is another, which I think is actually used in some places now, even. At least
It
to get
is.
some of the funding. Yeah.
Um, do you think, I mean, well, not do you think, do you have any sort of data or evidence of some kind that would show that these various methods you're referring to fund a government, to fund a limited government would be sufficient?
Well, for one thing, we didn't have in the 19th century, before there was an income tax, there was a country and it functions. Now there was a little bit of coercion. It wasn't purely voluntary. There were tariffs. And I think that might have been the main source of funding the governments prior to the 20th century. But the amount of coercion was quite small. And I think it at least shows, if you wanted like historical evidence, I don't think you need. I think there are other ways to get evidence other than just from history, but I think that shows that you don't need to have income tax in order to fund a government. I also don't think you need tariffs. Well, one thing I sometimes point out in connection with this issue is people volunteered to fight in the American Revolution. They risked their lives for the cause of liberty. And if people are willing to risk their lives to have a free country, why wouldn't they be willing to risk or give up something much less, which is some of their money? So I think that sort of reasoning gives one reason to think that there would be voluntary support of the government forthcoming. It's in people's interests to have a free country.
So the question is, efficient for your limited government? And
so the other thing I was going to say is the kind of government that I support is radically smaller in its function, so that you need much less funding to support the government. If all there is military, police, and courts, which is there's a legislature, but it's minuscule compared to what the government does. There's vastly less to finance, so you don't need nearly as much money to finance. So given that, then I think I see no problem in having it funded voluntarily.
So, okay, here's the question then. Would the military that we'd be retaining in this government, would we be retaining it in the same form? Would it be a lesser form of the military that we currently have?
I don't know how, I mean, specifically the size of the military, I can't say. I don't think there's a way to say, but it would be adequate. So to whatever threats are existent. Also, another thing that factors in here is foreign policy would be radically different than it is now. I think there's so many problems, like getting into the wars that we shouldn't go into at all. think we should only be fighting in wars that serve our own interests. So arguably, we shouldn't do a war like Vietnam. If we're going to go to a place like Afghanistan, we should go in, get out, just not do this nation building mission that drags on for decades. So the way the military operates and what its objectives will be are going to be very different. And we would act in such a ways that people wouldn't threaten us as much. We would nip the problems in the bud, so there wouldn't be a 9/11. There were signs, like they tried to bomb the World Trade Center in 1993, right? This is many years before 9/11. Let me just give me like 10 more seconds to finish up this stuff. So if we had a radically different foreign policy, one that was adequate to the threats, then we wouldn't. Then I think that sort of military could be financed. But I'll pause there.
Okay. Presumably, because I don't think you or I are tacticians or military strategists or anything of the sort, but I highly doubt that everyone that's been in those positions think that we, as like in the US, weren't serving our own country's interests in expanding the military that we were in. That's not me agreeing with everything we've done. Like that's a different discussion. I have a whole thing about war, and like I can probably agree with you on a lot there as well. But you kind of like beg the question that we were almost doing altruism with our military throughout the world there, it sounded. And then you seem to be claiming that we can I guess in a sense downsize, but just like make our military more appropriate to a point where it would sort of preemptively combat or discourage threats such as 9/11. That's where I tried to pause you, because that sounds insane to me. That was a terrorist attack. What is our military going to do about that? It can't. It won't ever. Like military is not the answer to attacks such as those. It's not even a preemptive answer to attacks such as those. It's actually like any military size. Actually, it's probably the military you're describing, which it doesn't even sound a whole lot different to the military we have. Military of sufficient size that would just be like, don't screw with me, kind of to the world, will necessitate attacks like that, because we're going to be pissing somebody off in some way, shape, or form, and that might come in their answers to us might come in the form of terrorist attacks. That's like you're just describing how 9/11 happened in the military you're wanting, it sounds to me. So I don't know why you invoked 9/11 at all. It's not a point in your favor. It's not a point in anyone's favor, really, but it's certainly not in yours.
Okay, well, I disagree, and I can talk about that some. So, but first, you made a point about altruism in war. I think there is a good argument that we engage in altruism in war. For instance, in being concerned about civilian casualties or not firing on an enemy until they fire on you. I think these are some of the rules of engagements that have made the U.S. fight with one hand behind its back, so to speak, and not fully destroy in the most convincing way possible the enemy in a way that it was done in like World War II when we dropped the atomic bombs. I mean, that's taking seriously a threat. We lost thousands of lives in Afghanistan for nothing. Now the Taliban is back in control, and it was total waste. It's tragic. So I think there is a case to be made that we went over there to like build up their nation. That shouldn't be the goal. It should be to protect our interests and nothing more. Now, as to preempting something like 9/11, I think there were signs for decades. As I mentioned, there was the attempted bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993, and there was the bombing of the barracks in Beirut. Was that 1982? There's been all kinds of terrorist attacks for decades, and America has allowed these terrorist cells to continue to act And I mean, they should have been nipped in the bud and not
How?
gotten to the point where they could do such a massive attack.
How?
Well, maybe the whole oil issue is one place where we could have. So these terrorists are funded, right? They're funded by states like Saudi Arabia and Iran. They have billions of dollars from oil money, I guess, to help fund the operation of these terrorist cells. But they shouldn't have that oil. That oil is not theirs. It was discovered by Western companies, and it was nationalized by the countries in the Middle East. And that's a whole contentious debate unto itself, whether it's their
Yes,
oil because it happened to be under their sand. But I think,
that oil should belong to the companies that discovered it, that were
yeah,
that were
yeah, I
sponsored by
think so.
states.
It should belong to the people who got the oil out of the ground, and not to dictatorships who violate the rights of their own people. And they shouldn't be able to use that money to oppress their own people and to export
Wait.
terror around the world.
These companies you're referring to, were they not sponsored by states?
I mean, there was, I don't know all the names of the companies, but there was
You
like
don't.
British
I don't either.
Petroleum
Mhm.
and
British Petroleum. Were they not sponsored by a state? Do you know what state that was?
well, maybe it was it takes private entrepreneurs to discover the technology. Now, maybe it was nationalized in Britain first. I don't know, but whoever's actually discovering the technology and doing the work of getting the oil out of the ground, I think they have the rights to it.
Okay,
And if it
but
is owned by,
that necessitates a dictatorship that you said you opposed, though. The dictatorship I'm referring to is the British Empire at the time. You're in favor of them because
dictatorship, well, I mean, there are degrees here. So no
yes.
country has been perfect and has perfectly respected rights of individuals, but I think Britain has certainly done a better job of it than many of the
I
countries in
don't
the Middle
disagree, but
East.
I'll still feel comfortable calling them a dictatorship because they have a fucking monarchy, and it was way, let's say, worse of a monarchy at the time you're talking about right now, when they were an empire. And these are the people that you said should have had a claim to the oil rather than these other dictatorships that you're flippantly talking about that may be worse in some kind of like respecting of social rights degree. Sure, I kind of don't care though. Um, it's just I don't see a consistency in your philosophy here, though. You said it shouldn't be in the hands of dictatorships, but if it's going to be in the companies that discovered it, it is still. It's just a different dictatorship.
A company is not a dictatorship.
Companies
It
that are
might
sponsored by
operate in a
state,
company in a
yes.
country that has elements of coercion. I don't think that
Okay,
means the
okay. Do
UK
you
is a
think British
dictatorship.
Petroleum was just run operating in somewhere like Saudi Arabia or like anywhere in the Levant or whatever, just out of their goodwill to the people around them, or was it imposed on them by an empire?
I don't know all the history
Okay, so
of the Middle East, but
let's I do want to go. I'm terribly sorry to cut out like this, but let's move two things. I do want to have a part two with you. I'm going to read
okay.
up more on Ayn Rand on some of the resources you gave me there, and I thank you for that again. I definitely suggest you read up on that history that we were just discussing.
I have read some on it. I'm just
More.
some of this I've read several years ago and it's not fresh in my memory, so it takes me a while to recall it. I mean, if we talk through this for like an hour, I'm sure I could bring a lot up, but it's not all at the ready. But you said you're going to look into Ayn Rand. There's also a lot written by people who are very familiar with this stuff. Like if you go to the Ayn Rand Institute's website, they have tons of commentary on the Middle East and our foreign policy and the whole history of the region and how we've appeased our attackers there. So you might be interested to look up some of that as well.
Sure, yeah.
All right, so you want to end it here for now?
Yeah. I do want to run by two, and that's creeping up on us. So,
Okay.
okay.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, Bryan.
All right. Well, thank you.
And we'll be in touch.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.